You're watching The Legal Breakdown. So, Glenn, Michael Cohen testified before a grand jury in New York on Monday in the Manhattan DA's case regarding Stormy Daniels and the whole hush money payout situation. What's at risk for Trump here? Why is Michael Cohen a compelling witness for the prosecution?
Most importantly, it's because Michael Cohen is a co-conspirator of Donald Trump in the Stormy Daniels hush money payment. When you think about what we've learned, including through the testimony of Michael Cohen, he was involved in a conspiracy with Donald Trump to pay off Stormy Daniels to keep her mouth shut, to bury from the American voters deeply damaging information about Donald Trump. Would have made him a far less appealing candidate back in 2016 if all of this information had spilled into the public square. So, anytime you have a co-conspirator who is willing or compelled to come forward and testify about not only what he did in the crime, but what his co-conspirator, in this case, Donald Trump, did in the crime, it is as directly incriminating as evidence gets. But of course, it also comes with challenges.
Now, you mentioned that Michael Cohen was a co-conspirator. Does the fact that Michael Cohen was not only found guilty, but actually served prison time for this exact case, does that make prosecuting a case against Trump, who directed and benefited from what Michael Cohen was doing, easier?
Some would say it makes it easier. Some would say it makes it harder. Easier because you have somebody who is directly involved in the crime, committing it at the direction of and for the benefit of his co-conspirator, Donald Trump. It makes it harder because Michael Cohen is an admitted criminal. And anytime prosecutors put an admitted criminal on the stand, that person will typically start out with at least one strike against his credibility. But, I argued to juries countless times when I was putting these kind of witnesses on the stand, either cooperating witnesses, which is a term of art to refer to a witness who has pleaded guilty, entered into a cooperation agreement with the prosecutors, and agreed to testify truthfully about the crimes of others. Anytime I put a witness like that on the stand, I would argue to the jury, ladies and gentlemen, please keep in mind, the prosecutors did not pick this witness. The prosecutors didn't pick Michael Cohen as the witness to put on the stand against Donald Trump. You know who picked the witness? Donald Trump, because that's who Donald Trump committed these crimes with. If I got to pick the witness, this is what I would argue in D.C., Brian. Just up the street from the courthouse is the historic Shiloh Baptist Church in D.C. I said, you know what, ladies and gentlemen, if I got to pick the witness, I would probably pick the choir at the Shiloh Baptist Church to bring in and present testimony, because they would be far more credible than this criminal witness. But I don't get to pick. Donald Trump picked the witness. He picked Michael Cohen. That's why we have to bring Michael Cohen to you as a testifying witness.
Yeah, and I get the whole point, this whole notion that he has a strike against him, but who better to bring forward to testify against Trump than somebody who has intimate knowledge of what Trump did? Like, nobody on the outside, nobody with their hands completely clean would have the kind of information, the kind of damaging information that Michael Cohen has by virtue of being there, by virtue of being a co-conspirator in this.
Exactly right. That's why we have to do business with co-conspirators when we're prosecuting conspiracy cases, right? It stands to reason. That is who can tell the jury directly what it is his criminal associate, his co-conspirator did.
Now, does Cohen have legal exposure here? Because, I know he went to prison for a federal crime, but this case is being prosecuted as a state case, for which he was a criminal accomplice. Or has he presumably, I guess, shielded himself by agreeing to cooperate against Trump?
Yeah, really interesting question. And the only way we could fully answer that question is if we had an understanding of the entire scope of Michael Cohen's conduct and misconduct. We know he pleaded guilty to a number of crimes in federal court in New York. So, any crimes he pleaded guilty to, he doesn't have any further exposure. There are double jeopardy prohibitions against ever bringing any charges against him for things he pleaded guilty to.
But now sorry to interrupt, but does that double jeopardy apply if it's federal versus state?
Yeah, different jurisdictions can actually prosecute a person for the identical crime, the identical conduct. So, I mean, think about tax fraud. If you file false tax returns, you file them federally, you file them locally. So, there are multiple jurisdictions that could prosecute you for what is basically the same criminal act. But double jeopardy doesn't apply as between the federal courts and the state courts, with some exceptions. New York has some statutes that sort of implicate double jeopardy, which I won't get into. But here's the thing. When he goes in to testify before the New York state grand jury, Alvin Bragg, the district attorney's case, he will get immunity because New York has a statute that says if somebody is subpoenaed to appear before the grand jury in New York, if they go in and testify, they are automatically granted immunity. What does that mean? That means Michael Cohen can't be prosecuted for anything he says before the grand jury. But here really is the catch for Michael Cohen. If he committed other crimes about which we don't know and that he didn't plead guilty to, and that he's not being given immunity for in the New York grand jury when he testifies, those are the kind of things that at trial, once Donald Trump is indicted and Michael Cohen is on the stand testifying against him, those are the things that Donald Trump's defense attorneys will go after scorched earth. They will try to make it look like he has received some kind of a benefit from prosecutors because he's committed other crimes for which he has neither been prosecuted nor been given immunity. And that, I think, Brian, is one of the reasons the New York prosecutors have met with Michael Cohen 20 times before presenting him to the grand jury. They need to mine Michael Cohen not only for all the information he has about Donald Trump's crimes that he amassed over the course of more than a decade of being Donald Trump's attorney and self-described fixer, but they really need to mine Michael Cohen for all of the misconduct he might be involved in. Because the last thing prosecutors want is to put a witness like Michael Cohen on the stand and all of a sudden have defense attorneys cross-examining him about crimes he committed that we knew nothing about. That can cause the case to implode.
Now, the flip side of that is that those prosecutors also invited Donald Trump to testify. Do you have an update on that?
Yeah, Donald Trump declined the invitation to appear before the New York grand jury. Yeah. It's an opportunity that we don't give many defendants who we're investigating and we're intending to indict. In white collar cases, we will sometimes do it because we want to give a defendant or a target of a grand jury investigation the opportunity to appear before the grand jury and say, look, ladies and gentlemen, prosecutors have it all wrong. They're misunderstanding what they think is the evidence against me. Let me explain to you why I didn't commit any crimes and why I should not be indicted. Now, not surprisingly, Donald Trump has declined that invitation. I maintain that if Donald Trump were placed under oath and started answering questions, if his lips were moving, he would likely be committing perjury. Yeah. So I think his lawyers wisely advised him, look, Donald, you are not appearing before the grand jury.
Okay, so let's switch gears a little bit to Mike Pence. Now, he made some news at the Gridiron dinner by saying the American people have a right to know what took place at the Capitol on January 6th. I'm curious what your thoughts are, given the fact that simultaneously, Mike Pence is also refusing to testify to the grand jury about that very issue. I'm wondering if the hypocrisy was at all evident for you.
Yeah, if you look up the term hypocrisy, you could probably just play Mike Pence's statement that, as you just quoted, the American people have a right to know what happened on January 6th, because if he were to complete the thought, it would be, and I refuse to testify in the grand jury about what happened on January 6th. Hello, hypocrisy.
Yeah.
And it really is beyond hypocritical. It damages our democracy because Mike Pence has some of the most directly incriminating evidence that could be provided to the grand jury. Why do I say that? Because Mike Pence was the one that Donald Trump was directly pressuring to unlawfully and unconstitutionally overturn the results of a presidential election. And because Mike Pence can testify about the statements coming out of Donald Trump's own mouth, that is some of the most direct, some of the most compelling, and some of the most incriminating evidence that could possibly be offered. And for Mike Pence to say the American people have a right to that information, but I'm not going to tell the grand jury about it is absurd.
Yeah, well, maybe he'll write a book or something. That's usually when we find out that kind of information from people who refuse to testify. Glenn, what's the deal with Pence's subpoena to appear before that grand jury? I know he's fighting that right now, but will there be any public indication as to whether or not he's won that fight?
Only if things begin to leak out, because all grand jury related litigation is secret as a matter of law. It happens behind closed doors in Chief Judge Beryl Howell's courtroom. So we know Mike Pence has made noises about raising two possible privileges in his zeal not to testify about the crimes of Donald Trump. One is executive privilege. He loses that, hands down, because Donald Trump has been trying to impose executive privilege on Mike Pence, but it is not Donald Trump's privilege to assert. It is the sitting president's, Joe Biden. So that will go nowhere. The other privilege Mike Pence is trying to raise is speech or debate clause privilege. And what that essentially says is that if you're a member of Congress, if you are a legislator, then anything you happen to say that involves a discussion about, legislation or robust debate about the pros and cons of a particular bill, well, that can never be used against you. You can't be forced to testify about it. And Mike Pence is saying, well, because I, have the ceremonial duty of presiding over the Senate for the count of the Electoral College votes, I'm kind of a legislator, and I should have that same speech or debate clause privilege and protection. I'm not going to say that's a laughable claim because it's never been raised or litigated before. I do think it is absolutely a losing claim, because just because Mike Pence has this one-day ceremonial duty does not make him a legislator. He remains a member of the executive branch. So I think ultimately the courts will also shoot down that privilege, and Mike Pence will be compelled to testify before the grand jury about the crimes of Donald Trump.
Well, I guess the ultimate irony of this is that, Mike Pence is continuing to protect and defend Donald Trump and the Republican Party, even though that is the same party that tried to have him hanged on January 6th. But we'll see if there's some constituency for Mike Pence in the Hang Mike Pence party. So that remains to be seen. For anybody watching, if you want to keep up on both the Manhattan DA probe and this January 6th investigation, as well as the Fulton County investigation, all these investigations bearing down on Donald Trump right now, make sure to subscribe to both of our channels. The links are right here on the screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.